Today on Interfaith Voices, we host Christopher Hitchens, one of the most famous of the new atheists. Most of us know what he believes and does not believe, but today we discover who he is. We meet the English schoolboy who liked to sing in church, the activist whose life constantly blended the political and the personal, and the writer who befriended the famous author and fatwa target Salman Rushdie.
Well, I have a chapter, a long one, about him and knowing him before, during, and after the Ayatollah Khomeini offered money in his own name as the theocratic head of a foreign state for the murder of a novelist. And I thought that day, well, that's it. That's a real confrontation between everything I like and everything I don't like.
Then it's the new relevance of the Jewish Sabbath in modern life. I'm Maureen Fiedler. First, this news. Welcome to Interfaith Voices, Public Radio's independent, listener-supported show about faith, ethics, and spirituality. We come to you from the studios of WAMU 88.5, our partnering station in Washington, D.C. I'm Maureen Fiedler. As a longtime journalist and one of the best-known new atheists, Christopher Hitchens' every opinion is just a mouse click away. But his new book lets us in on a more personal side of this famous contrarian. It's called Hitch 22, a memoir, and it offers insight into Christopher Hitchens' anti-theism and his politics through the lens of his past. It's been variously described by critics as witty, combative, provocative, indignant, and generally outrageous. He's with us today from Philadelphia to talk about the life behind his work. Christopher Hitchens, welcome back to Interfaith Voices.
Well, very nice of you to have me back.
And why did you decide to write your own memoir?
Well, I was invited to do it at about the time that I turned 60, which is a time when you'll find this out yourself one day.
I've already passed that
Oh,
stage.
come on. When one's thoughts sometimes, flee a bit back over the shoulder to look at the past. That just occurs naturally. And then there was the rather remarkable fact of reading about my own death in the catalogue of the National Portrait Gallery in London, which made a transposed caption referring to me as the late. And I can tell you something, that does concentrate your mind.
Well, now, in your book, you talk about your mother, your father, the boarding school you attended in Britain, where you had to go to worship services, and where you say you actually liked singing in church. So I'm wondering, as you look back, were you ever a believer, or were you always skeptical of religion?
It wasn't even that, really. It wasn't a decision to become an unbeliever, as just the realization that I couldn't become a believer. These claims were either meaningless to me or sinister, objectionable.
Even as a young man, you believed that when you were in school?
Yeah, there's been some work done on this, apparently, by neuroscientists as well. It is true to say, very, very generally, that a large majority of human beings are naturally religious. They have a tendency to worship. It is just as true to say of quite a large minority of us, it's been guessed apparently at 14% or so, that we're not capable of believing. Just can't do it. You talk to me about the Trinity, about the infinite grace and mercy, and so it's white noise, absolute white noise. Doesn't mean a thing.
And so why did you like singing? Was it just the music itself that attracted you?
Oh, I'm very glad, and I actually mentioned this, that I was made to attend Anglican prayers and learn the King James Version of the Bible and the Thomas Cranber prayer book. That was very useful to me, and was one of my early stirrings of realization that what I really ought to be doing was studying literature and poetry, of which these were outstanding examples.
So you've looked back on those basically as literature.
Yes, and they come back to me. I mean, a hymn like John Bunyan's To Be a Pilgrim, for example, or the prayer of St. Ignatius Loyola or Sir Francis Drake, they'll stay with you till the end of your days if you've learned them when you're young.
Now, your mother was of Jewish heritage.
Yes.
But you didn't find that out until long after she died.
No, it was a family secret, yes.
Could you tell us that story and when you found out and what it meant to you when you did?
Well, my mother's family came from that area of the German-Polish frontier, which Helen Thomas thinks all Jews should go back and live in now. And they made a new start in Liverpool, and they were quite orthodox in the late 19th century. By the time my mother was born, she, I think, had had enough of it and wanted essentially to be English, didn't want to be a member of a minority, didn't want her children to be subjected to the sort of rather low-level prejudice that you can get in England. It's not terrible, but it's insidious. And so she decided to keep it from everybody, including my father. So it wasn't until my father was dying, and by the sheer coincidence that my mother's mother had outlived both my parents, that she decided there was no more point in keeping the family secret and broke it to my brother and myself.
And what did it mean to you once you found out?
Well, I'd never had any interest in Judaism as a religion, except as the religion from which Christianity and Islam are plagiarized. I'd always been very dubious about Zionism and very doubtful about it, many reservations about it, which I still have. So it didn't change any of that, and I don't think it really changed my attitude either to the survival of the Jewish people, because it struck me very forcefully that from my studies and reviews of 20th century history and literature, that those who hated the Jews or wished for their destruction were not just anti-Semitic, but were the common enemies of humanity. And I like to think that I would have no need for any personal stake in it in order to believe that. Mm-hmm. So it hasn't, in fact, been a very big earthquake in my life. If I'd known it when I was younger, if I'd known that the other Jewish boys at school were sort of members of my own kin, say, it could have been fascinating. But I think that's just what my mother didn't want me to have to face. Because then I wouldn't be fully English and I wouldn't be on the way to being a possible gentleman.
Now, you compare the disciplinary system in your boarding school with the disciplines that religions use. What do you believe they have in common?
Well, what they have in common is an authority figure whose authority is enhanced by the claim that he holds the Bible, he has the scriptures. And so he's not just a bureaucrat who's in charge of the school, the headmaster, for example, but he takes the prayers. He gives out the order of service every day and reinforces the idea, which is very strong in England, where the head of the state, the monarch, is also the head of the church, that authority is not just human, but is divine, and for that reason, much harder to question.
And that's similar to a minister or a religious figure of some kind in a hierarchy, for example.
Well, that's how it seems to me. I mean, there are some primates, mammals, fellow humans, who throughout history have been able to have a huge effect on their fellow mammals and primates by claiming that they have a divine power, that they're the representatives on Earth of something supernatural. It's the easiest way of getting power in the actual world, the only world we have, the material world. And that was made very plain to me when I was very small. I could see the trick being pulled. I mean, he's not just the boss. He's God's anointed in a small way. Mm-hmm. And then you could see that when you looked at, well, the monarchy, the papacy, various cults, and other forms of delusion.
Okay. Now, you talk openly in the book about your mother's concern, and you alluded to this a minute ago, that you become part of the upper class in Britain, a proper British gentleman.
Absolutely.
And it's one of the reasons you go by Christopher and not Chris.
Yes.
And I'm wondering, is that sense of class consciousness related at all to your disdain for religion? I mean, do you see religion as a marker of socially or intellectually lower classes, for example?
No, I don't. I mean, because the Anglican Church in Britain, which I was brought up in, that was baptized into, is in fact used to be, it's not so much now, to be fair to it, but used to be very much part of the social hierarchy.
As you look back on the years that you describe in the book, is there some kind of a defining experience to which you attribute your atheism? Or was this simply a developing awareness in your life?
Well, I do remember a moment when I must have been about 10, when my nature teacher, as we called her, we were small, who was also our scripture teacher.
Nature teacher?
Nature, well, in other words, you go on walks with this old lady to look at the trees and the plants and so forth.
Okay.
One day she tried to unite the scripture and the nature and said, "Isn't it nice that God has made the trees and the grass and the herbage and so on